Hello and welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today the Poison Pen is fortunate to have back with us, even if it's only virtually, one of my favorite authors, Tessa Arlen, whose new book is A Dress of Violet Taffeta. Before we begin our chat, I do want to let those listening in know that the Poison Pen does have copies of Tessa's new book on order, and we would be happy to put one aside for you or put one in the mail. All you need to do is go online or give us a call and we can make that happen. And now I'd like to welcome Tessa Arlen.
Hello, lovely to be with you again.
I'm delighted you could be here too. I'm always fascinated by an author, kind of who they were before they started writing. And your own life story could almost be a novel before you became a writer yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about Tessa pre-writing days?
Well, actually, pre-writing days, I was just a stay-at-home mom.
Well, did you kind of go around the world? Wasn't your father a diplomat or?
Yeah, I mean, that was my childhood. I had, it looks like a wonderful childhood, but after, being dragged around the world, which was great. I mean, I'm not, it makes you very comfortable with other cultures. And these were very different cultures, Far East and Middle East. But I was, when I was about 10, they decided that I needed an English education. So so I was sent back to England to boarding school, which was a terrible shock because we were in Singapore and I went back to England and it was like autumn, and so everything was bitterly cold and colorless, it seemed to me. And boarding schools in that time were pretty strict, and the food was absolutely, it was kind of like post-war British food. Really dull. I think that's what made me always want to cook. I was always eating lumpy mashed potato and thought, surely if butter was put in this, it'd be better. But it was a wonderful childhood of sun and the tropics. Beautiful.
Kind of discovered your love of history in boarding school. I think one of your teachers told you that history is just very old gossip.
Yes, I was a bit of a daydreamer at school. I think that was another part of me. Was so horrified at being in England in a English boarding school, the top of a very chilly, windy hill. I kind of went inside. I was a real daydreamer, and I had no interest or ability for math. I was appalling at that. But I had an incredible history teacher. She would talk in a whisper, and we would all lean forward, and she was a true historian. She was wonderful. She was elderly, and as you say, she used to say history is just very old gossip, and then she'd make it live for us. So I think that and the English literature were the only things I was really interested in. So the rest of the time I just spent in my head. So my parents would be livid when they got my school reports.
Well, it was probably practice for your future days as a writer. So eventually you grew up and you had a connection to the Olympics, if I understand correctly.
When I first came to America, I lived in LA. And I had a friend who was interviewing to be a recruiter for the Olympics. And she said, you should do this. You like people. I was thinking, not really. Anyway, I did. And I started there well before the Olympics started. I started there in end of 1982. And I had never worked in America. I had no idea how seriously, because the English back then didn't really take very much seriously. And I was always amazed how incredibly professional everybody was, and how incredibly dedicated, and how they would work these massively long hours. So I worked in HR, and actually I interviewed my husband for a job. And And that's how I met him.
How romantic.
It was. I know, it actually doesn't sound romantic. I interviewed him for a job, but it was. Meeting him was wonderful. It made LA a much happier place for me.
So you eventually retired, raised a family, and the idea of writing kind of entered your life?
Well, I didn't retire from work to raise a family. I actually was a working mom for a long time, truly. And it wasn't exciting. I mean, it was office, going into an office and fulfilling. And I was always trying to think of other ways of wriggling out of doing, 9 to 5 drudgery. I think what I didn't like was that it was same thing every day, same place, same people. That's it. And I didn't actually start writing until our third daughter left home, and we lived in the Northwest, and it was October and pouring down, so there was no gardening. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I've got no more excuses. I should really perhaps go back to work. And then I thought, well, why not have a go at, see if you can write a novel, see if you can get to the end of it, start it, do the middle, and finish it. And I did. And I never thought for one moment that I'd sell it. My husband came up with that idea. And so he said, look for an agent. It took me forever. But I was so lucky in the agent I found, because she is absolutely fabulous. We've done 8 books together, and I have such respect and liking for her. So she sold that book in 5 weeks, and I nearly died. I thought, what the hell have I done?
Especially when they probably wanted another book from you too after that.
They did a oops, now I've gone and done it. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've dropped one of my thingy jigs. They wanted another book from me, and that was frightening, because the first book was easy. I took my time. Second book, they'd already paid me in advance, so I was a mess. And then I thought, yeah, you can do it. For heaven's sake, just fake it until you can make it, as my friend told me. And yeah, so Kevin really got me ready for publishing. She really, she made me rethink the book in parts, explain what a chapter was. And she's been my guide and my best critic ever since, I think.
That was your Lady Montfort series. That was your debut.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, I based that book, the house in that book, I based it on my school, because it was a big old country house. Beautiful, beautiful. All those old country houses, they all went through a terrible time after the first, and then even worse after the Second World War, because the taxes were huge on them, and they were massive, and they needed a huge staff of servants to keep, and groundsmen to keep it going. So basically, a lot of them turned into private schools and government institutions. But mine was exquisite. I still, can remember so many aspects of it, being there. It was lovely. That was the only lovely thing about it, was the building.
So you did your Lady Montfort books, and then you kind of took a segue into World War II with your Hoppy Redfern.
Yeah, which were fun. I think that was really inspired by my dad, who was whose late teenage years was spent in Greenwich, East Greenwich, and who took a really different view of it than his parents probably did, because he thought it was huge fun. And he sort of took a real teenage boy's delight in it. He was, at the end of the war, he became, he was an RAF cadet. So when he was 18, they recruited, into the war. But he was at Bletchley Park. He never saw action, but in his heart, he wanted to be like every other English schoolboy. He wanted to be a Spitfire pilot. And so I wanted to write a mystery around my father's England. And I couldn't do that because I had no idea what Spitfire pilots did other than die very by the thousands. So I wrote about a young woman who's the air raid warden in a village who falls in love with an American Air Force pilot when they came over to help us out. Because my grandfather had that happen to his farm. It was requisitioned not for an airfield, but for basic training. So I kind of replayed all my parents, my father's and my grandfather's war memories through it.
And then you decided to you've been mixing history and mystery with your books, and with your next book, In Royal Service to the Queen, you went straight history.
Yeah. I have no idea why. Oh, I know why. My agent, she said, write something about the royal family. What do you think of them? And I was like, well, not a lot. I don't really think about them at all. And they're behaving horribly now. But I did kind of like that post-World War royal family, because they were so, even then, they were so out of step and very dated, all through the 60s, 70s, when I was a young girl growing into adulthood, the royal family were not cool. They were really a fuddy-duddy and terribly good, except for Margaret.
I was going to say, except for Margaret, yeah.
Except for Margaret, who really said, to hell with this, and didn't play along anymore. So I'd heard about this governess to the Margaret and Elizabeth, and how she'd really been there for them through the war years. Always supposed to be going back to college, never did. I think they, as a family, don't let go of people that are, fulfill that necessary role. And she was adored by the girls, and she loved them. And she gave up marrying, she gave up an independent life for the two of them. And it all ended very badly. She was the first to kiss and tell. She wrote this delightful book. Delightful. Nothing revealing. Yeah. And she was chucked out of her Graysonfavor cottage, denied her pension, and they didn't speak to her again. And so I told her story from her perspective, without being too heavy on the royals.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's a very balanced view. And now we come to your new book, which was just published, A Dress of Violet Taffeta. Tell us a little bit about that.
Another real life female protagonist. This is set, the story starts in 1893. And it takes a segment of a woman's life who comes from a sort of comfortably off family, but not an aristocrat, but a typical turn of the century woman, completely undereducated, raised to be pretty, a good wife and mother. And her husband is a drunk and a spendthrift. And he runs off when she's late 20s, 30, I think she was nearly 30. He runs off with a pantomime dancer, leaving her absolutely destitute with a 5-year-old daughter and an aging mother. and absolutely no ability whatsoever to earn her living in a way that wouldn't mean becoming a companion or a governess. But she did have this ability to make clothes, and she had as a child made her dolls' clothes, and they were remarkable. So she decides the only thing she can do is to make dresses. And her younger sister has married very well, husband, but he's also a bit of a rotter. But she has connections. And so Lucy Wallace makes an evening gown, and she wears it to a country house party at her sister's husband's place, hoping that it's so eye-catching and remarkable that people will ask her to make one for them. And they do. But she has attached to her quite a bit of a reputation, because when her husband divorces her, she thinks, that's it, I don't want him back. If he comes back and if I made any money, he'll get through it. So she divorces him, which in 1893 was an outrageous thing to do. And she also went into trade, which was a terrible thing to do as well. I mean, it just wasn't respectable. It just wasn't right for her background. But she's to hell with it. I've got nothing to lose. I have everything to gain. And I don't just want to make dresses, she says, as she's, finally paying a rent and putting food on the table. I want to be London's top designer. And that in Europe at the time was a male-dominated occupation. House of Worth, Doucet, Paul Poirot, I could go on forever. They were all Rue de la Paix, Paris, established. They made grand dresses for the rich, entitled, and here's Lucy. And she pulls it off. I mean, it's remarkable how the things she came up with. She was a complete innovator. She would. The more I found out about her, the more admiration I have for her, because God knows it's hard enough to pull off anything as a woman, but to do it then was a coup, and she did. And she falls in love, remarries, and everything is going superbly. She's opened a salon in New York and Chicago. She's popular. She's loved. She's created she shows her new season's models. She's one of the first people to do a runway show.
Yeah.
She's designing costumes for the West End stage. And she is tacking back and forth on the Mauritania between New York and London. And then her husband says, let's book a passage on this new ship. And they do. Yeah. And it's the Titanic, which they survive. And then there's the aftermath of that, which is...
It was, everyone is trying to find someone to blame, essentially, in that.
Or distractions, because they couldn't be blamed for the sinking, but they could be something to throw the newspapers other than this. What do you mean there were only 20 lifeboats on the ship? What do you mean they didn't have a lifeboat drill? What do you mean they were going too fast into an ice field? They wanted to deflect all of that. They didn't want the shipping company that owned Titanic, White Star, they didn't want that to disappear in hundreds of lawsuits. That what they wanted was to basically distract. And my husband was one of those to do that. He was the one that they said, this man, whatever they said, that's for you to read. Anyway, I loved her story. I loved who she was. I thought she was a character, and
she was fascinating. And you bring out a lot of things that I never realized. You talk about how she thought in design in terms of color, and that's evolutionary, and how she actually named her creations, which I think was ahead of the time too.
She named her, yeah, she she was a fabulous listener. And she believed if she was designing a gown, an important gown for a grand occasion, that the wearer should, it should reflect her personality. She used to call them dresses of emotion or the raiment of allurement. She was totally into that whole Edwardian, deeply feminine, slightly naughty, revealing. There were no more curvy whalebone corsets. Her lines were fluid and floaty, and her color sense was out of this world. And she really, I mean, her focus must have been huge. So she would design for the personality of the woman who was going to wear it. And of course, it mattered hugely in those days how you dressed. Those women used to change 4 or 5 times a day. Anyway, she used to name them, and they were great, especially when she did a runway show. You know, it would be announced, and here is Theodora wearing A Dream of Endless Summer, or what was the other one that I loved most of all? Passion Flower's First Kiss. I mean, they were all suggestive of romance and seduction, and it was so the time, you know, that early 1910s, before the First World War.
She was fascinating and revolutionary in many ways because she understood, she had the artistic side of it, but she also had the business side. She had some help from someone in her company, I guess you'd call it, with the business end of things. But she treated her employees fairly, which was kind of like a revolution at the time. The women working for her weren't used to being the seamstresses and all those. They were actually, at the times, given a relatively stable job and relatively good employment.
Yes, I think, you know, the early 1900s were horrendous for working people. I mean, they were a nightmare. And poverty was, the have-nots had nothing. And the women who worked for her were extremely skilled. So they weren't what you would call real rag trade. They didn't do piecework out of a cottage making, you know,
shifts or
shirt collars, or a part of something. What they did was they worked, the French called it an atelier. They worked in her salon, in the floors above her shop and her fitting rooms. And she did. She kept her staff, which is a huge indication that she was good, because skilled workers were valuable. And she had two assistants that she mentions in her memoir. And her memoir, by the way, was written when things weren't so good for her, because she wasn't, after World War I, her style wasn't hip. It wasn't hip anymore. So her memoir, called Discretions and Indiscretions, or Indiscretions and Discretions, I can't remember which way around, was rather wistful. I mean, she certainly didn't have a problem tooting her own horn and claimed a lot of firsts. But she mentions 2 assistants, and one was this young girl, Celia, who she said worked incredibly hard, learned every aspect of the trade. And the other one was the secretary who was on the Titanic with her. Her last name was Francatelli. So I took those 2 women and combined them to a fictional character called Celia Franklin. And Celia gives us the point of view of what it's like not to have at that time, what it's like to be an orphan, what it's like to have had to, at some time in her life, she'd been in the workhouse, what it was like not to be hungry. And so when she becomes Lucy's maid of all work, she can only afford 1 servant. You know, I wish I could only afford 1.7. She is incredibly bound to Lucy out of gratitude, and also determined that they will be a success. So she takes over the whole business of bookkeeping and running the workforce, and they become really good friends. I mean, really close, sort of friendship that comes out of the sheer need to make things work. And so I love writing Celia because she's absolutely different. She's so practical, and Lucy's a bit
Lady, yeah.
She's creative and temperamental. Yeah, I love writing that book. I had so much fun.
You can tell there's just so much in the book to enjoy. And if Lucy was not a character enough, we introduce her sister Eleanor, who had to go kind of earn a living too because her husband liked to spend money that he didn't bring in.
Yes, her husband. I read so much about her husband. He was such a character. Well, I think she helped him too. They got money, and then what happened was he wanted to be accepted by them all for a set, and so he led a very lavish, generous lifestyle, and she ends up writing novels. And she doesn't just write novels, she writes pretty racy stuff.
For the time, yeah.
For the time, yes. Have you, by any chance, read 3
Yes.
Weeks?
Years ago, 3 Weeks, I think, was her kind
3 Weeks was her big bestseller.
You people would always reference tiger skin or something like that, and you had to read the book to figure out what they were talking.
So shall I tell you the tiger skin doggerel? So after it came out, it was banned, and everybody was shattered. And it was really just kind of silly. But she made a huge name for herself and made a fortune out of this book. So people were saying things like, would you like to sin on a tiger skin with Eleanor Glynn, or would you rather err with her on some other fur?
Mm-hmm.
And somebody said to me the other day, the English aristocracy was so mean, weren't they? And I was like, yeah, they were, and they didn't keep it.
Mm-hmm.
It was, but I read some of that book and it was actually rather endearing.
Mm-hmm.
But she was flamboyant. Lucy wasn't really very flamboyant, but Eleanor Glynn was. And she was the spectacular one of the two. She had that.
Well, she went to America for a book tour, or probably several times, I believe, and people were lined up like she was a rock star or something.
Well, I think she was. I'm trying to remember the names of those amazing writers. Was it Jacqueline Suzanne? And
yes.
Do you remember those?
Collins. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. All those.
That's actually a very good
combo.
She was.
Yeah, comparison. She was like the Edwardian
version.
And she ended up in Hollywood, and she wrote for the scripts for the silver screen, and she ended up directing too. So she also led a very, and both of them had their time. Do you know what I mean? They had their time, and then after the war for Lucy, it was a slow decline, and the same for Eleanor. So, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about research methods, because one of the things that I really admired most about your book, and there's a lot to admire in it, was how you are able to give the reader an impression of Lucy's designs when we can't see them on the page. You can't see a picture of them. You have to use words to create that image in the reader's mind. What kind of research tools did you use to kind of ground yourself in her work and her life?
Well, I was very lucky because I was in London with my husband. It was February, horrible, cold February. And we popped into the Victoria and Albert one of my favorite London museums. And there happened to be an exhibition of Lucille, which is Lucy's label. And I'd researched for the Lady Montfort series, so I'd heard about her. I'd heard that she was very ambitious and that she was a little arrogant. And she's in Downton Abbey. Julian Fellows referred to her in Downton Abbey as that woman who owns a shop. So she wasn't really, she didn't strike me as being a very sympathetic character. Oh God, that's my other thing.
That's all right. Don't worry about it.
I didn't completely lose it. When I saw these dresses that were absolutely magnificent, and they'd been really well preserved. There weren't a lot of them because clothes don't keep that well.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that hit me the most, apart from the incredible color, the amazing combination of colors, she had this gift of putting hues together so that the dress actually looked like it was moving. It had a sort of shimmer. And the line was beautiful. And then, of course, the detail they were works of art. And I was spellbound, truly I was. And I love beautiful things. I mean, I'm very visual. So the impact was huge. And I was like, oh my God, I have to write about this woman. Because there was something, there was a lot of wit to her design. She wasn't just churning out grand dresses. They were spectacular. So there wasn't much about her, but the V&A did have a sort of coffee table book of her designs at about 1906. And they were all her drawings because her grandson had donated them to the V&A, and it was her journal. And down the side of the journal, there were, the dress. And then stapled or pinned were all the different fabrics and the trimmings that had gone into that dress. And I thought, my God, they were. And then it described how those dresses were made. So I actually attended a sort of V&A instruction on the complexity of those dresses. And because I don't know, I am visual. So to me, they lived in my head. There was one dress in particular, I can see it right now. It was absolutely gorgeous. A sort of green gold, layers of very fine silk and chiffon. So when it came to, I hope I didn't overdo it, but when it came to, her working on a dress, I would imagine those incredible clothes.
Well, I think that was the late 19th century was really the beginning of the idea that fashion could be an art. It was not just something that women bought and wore. This was something that you really... Oops, we've lost you, Tessa.
His clothes. Have I gone?
Yep, there you go. You're back.
We went on to do wonderful 1960s designs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pierre Cardin, I'm trying to remember all those names, and I'm so bad at names. Mary Quant, they became art forms, and they go on exhibition.
Yeah.
But there was another designer in France called Paul Poiret, and he had a life career as long as Lucy's. He designed the most incredible things. If you have a moment, you could Google Paul Poiret. It's like Poirot, but with an E-T, and see his incredible costumes. He did stunning stuff. And when the Russian ballet came to town, Leon Bakst, who was the set designer and costumier, also took the whole of that time of fashion another leap forward into Orientalism, as they called it, and wild colors. And again, Lucy was there. She was enthralled.
Let's take a little sidestep and talk about the writing process in general. I found it interesting that two pieces of advice you frequently give are always write the book you want to read, and a book is 1/3 writing and 2/3 editing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the 1/3 writing and 2/3 editing is really true. I mean, there's more to writing a book than having a great idea that stimulates you and should stimulate you into writing it. And the other, and then it's slog. I mean, I can't tell you how often before you even before you even submit to your editor, you had 2 or 3 good goes at it, and then you have to wait, and then she'll come back and give you her thoughts, and if you're lucky, you have a good one. I'm very lucky. Then there's all the copy editing, and it just goes on and on and on. With me, copy editing is huge because I first of all, do you remember I was a girl at school who was always daydreaming instead of learning the rules of semicolon. God, I felt I've learned a lot about punctuation. Yes, I have. I had one copy editor who used to get really angry with me, like, well, what do you think it should be? And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. So that's and you can change bits in your story right up until the
Final edits, yeah.
First pass, when you're checking only for mistakes that have happened in all this changing. So all of that happens, but to me, the thing that I love the most is actually coming up with the idea. Somebody says yes, and then I really love the research, which I've already done, and then the writing. And you should never look at the New York Times or USA Today bestseller list and try and work out
what to write. Yeah,
to write, because it's 2 years away, and trends will have changed. And not only that, it's got to be something you care about.
Mm-hmm.
And God only knows, if I could work out a bestseller, I would. But what really keeps me going forward in this strange business is that I really enjoy writing.
And it shows. If you don't mind, let's talk a little bit maybe about you as a reader. I know you've had a lifelong passion for C.S. Lewis, but what have you read recently, or what is on your reading sites that you might want to share with others?
I look down because I'm bad at names, but I have just finished reading a really wonderful book by Kerry Ma. It's historical fiction, and it's set in the 20s. It starts in the 20s, about Sylvia Beach, who was the woman who started the American bookstore in Paris, Shakespeare and Company. And she was the center for all the American writers that hung around Gertrude Stein and who flocked to Paris during those rather dreary years of Prohibition and everything that kind of clung to that in America. And it's called The Paris Bookseller, and she writes a fabulous story, because Sylvia Beach was the woman who actually published James Joyce's Ulysses when it was
banned for being obscene or something like that.
For being obscene, yes. And I love the fact that he could have been arrested. When it was published, there were tons of people. Oh God, I wish I keep this thing in. There were tons of people who could buy this book on subscription. So that's how they published it.
Oh.
And then they had to smuggle those books that had been already bought, right? Mm-hmm. They had to smuggle them in from Canada individually. I mean, can you only imagine? And then, of course, he became huge. But that's definitely a book to read, and I really loved it. Okay. Then another great, if you like World War II and you like The Resistance, Erica Roebuck wrote a fabulous book called Sisters of Night and Fog.
Yeah, that's the one with Coco Chanel, isn't it, or something to do?
No, that was the one with special operations executive Winston Churchill's
Oh,
spies, a woman called Violet Szabo, and then an American socialite, and I can never remember her name. So I'm not even going to try. I think her name was Virginia something. Anyway,
yeah.
they were, of course, she manages to write this account of these two women and to blend their lives together without it becoming too ugly.
Yeah.
What happened to them was ugly.
Yeah.
And it bears out my theory that we can write about heavy, ugly things, but I think we should never use heavy, ugly language to do it. Otherwise, it's too over the top. It's too overwrought.
Mm-hmm.
But Erica Roebuck has a wonderful touch.
Yeah.
So she, you're not flinching all the way through this book, or like skip reading a bit because it's just too much. But she addresses some heartbreaking topics, of course.
That's a real trick for writers, because I know what you're talking about. One of my favorite books from last year was The Last Bookshop in London by Lynn Martin. And she doesn't shy away from the fact that London in World War II was not a good place to be for most people.
No.
But
no, it wasn't.
She gives you moments of hope, and you don't completely want to jump off a bridge at the end of the book.
No. I've read some books recently where I'm going, oh no, get through this bit quick, because we don't, we do need to explore awful things that happen. We mustn't forget them, but to relish, that's what it is. There's something vicarious. And what I loved about Erica's writing was that she was talking about something horrendous, but you weren't living vicariously through it. And so I heartily recommend that. And I was thinking of writing about Churchill's wife, Clementine. But I'm not going to, because Marie Benedict
did
it so well. And I'm just like, no, not going there. She's such a solid writer, Marie Benedict. I really loved her. I love all her books. And I'm waiting for a new and very talented writer, Alka Joshi. I'm waiting for her third book to come out.
Oh.
She wrote The Henna Artist and The Secret Keepers.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I think is her new one The Perfumer of Paris or something?
Yes,
like that. Yeah.
That's right. I'm waiting for that to come out. I want to read that very much. Because my parents were in India for quite a while. And after school, I spent a gap year there in Delhi. Yeah. So that's, I'm really looking forward to that.
Can we expect another? Are you working on something? Would you rather not say?
I'm working on something, and we're in the middle of talking about it. So
fingers crossed.
Penguin, yeah. So we'll probably hear soon.
Oh, good.
But I can tell you that it's another historical novel about a real life woman. And it's set in between 1933 and 1938. And she's another fascinating rule breaker.
Well, we can all think about that and try to guess before it becomes a work of published.
Why not? Then you can say, if I get it, if it happens, you can say, Tess, I knew it was that all along.
If you don't, then we just won't say anything about it. Now, before we run out of time, and I can't believe it's gone by so quickly, how can readers discover more about your books? Do you have a website? Are you on social media?
I'm on, my website is tessaarlen.com. Okay. And my, Facebook is Tessa Arlen Author. And I joined Instagram, which I love.
Oh.
because I love the visualness. And
Yeah.
if you want to see what Lucy's dresses look like, I've got quite a few that I had to get permission to put up there of her gowns that are still around. And that's on Instagram.
Okay.
And I'm Tessa Arlen on the Instagram search thing. And that's it.
Well, that's certainly enough for anyone to keep up with. I cannot believe we're already out of time. It's been just a delight having you here, Tessa. Your new book is A Dress of Violet Taffeta. We also have some of your older titles in stock at the Poison Pen, and I would encourage readers to explore those as well. You're extremely talented and gifted writer. And I can't wait for your new book. I'm already thinking of women in the 1930s who were rule breakers and trying to come up with
there weren't many. No, there were hundreds.
We just don't hear about all of them.
No. Or they were quiet rule breakers. But I always look forward to my yearly chat with you.
Hopefully sometime we can have you back in person when things are a little bit more settled.
Yeah. How is that going there for you?
It's ups and downs. It's better than it was 2 years ago or even a year ago, but it's one of those things where it's almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But that's life. You muddle through, as they say in England, I guess.
We have been muddling through. We just have to keep on
muddling.
Doing it. Acceptance is a really good route to that.
And chocolate.
And chocolate. Yes. Well, I'm the other girl. I'm the glass of red wine girl. But if I don't have a glass of red wine, it's definitely chocolate.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Tessa. Thank those of you listening into this virtual author chat at the Poison Pen. We look forward to having you come back next time.
Thank you. So lovely to see you again.